Good morning and welcome to Wednesday. It's February 22nd, 2023. It is also Black History Month. That means it's time for the Education Town Hall here on We Act Radio, which is located in the heart of downtown Anacostia. We are coming to you live from our virtual platform, which is Anacostia Adjacent. I first want to begin by thanking the creator for this day and for the opportunity to present to you the latest installment of the Education Town Hall. This is your humble servant and host, Thomas Bird, and I will be joined shortly by my associate producer, Valerie Jablo. I think we're going to have a great show today. This being Black History Month, we want to focus on some of that and as well as the efforts around this country to basically obliterate Black history. I don't know another way of putting it. And so we're going to have some wonderful guests who come to opine about that with us. We're going to play a clip first. We have a clip that emanates from ABC 11 News out of North Carolina in the Raleigh area. And it's a short clip to kind of set the tone for this conversation. And so we're going to ask that our producers play that right now.
If you remember last year, those threats were targeted at historically Black colleges and universities. This year, we're seeing those threats inside K through 12 classrooms. Jordan High, the target of threats today because of that African American Studies course. All of it happening as we celebrate Black History Month.
If you look around, you can explore the past and present, celebrate the contributions of Black Americans, and honor historical figures who paved the way.
Black history is American history.
Thank you for that, our technical producer, Virginia. She's gonna play another clip. It's by TYT Indisputable. They have a YouTube presence. While she's queuing that up, I'm just going to read a quick paragraph from the Virginia Governor, Glenn Youngkin, who recently proposed changes to the state's history curriculum that erases mention of slavery, institutional racism, and prominent figures of color, and further centers white conservative ideology and Greco-Roman history as fundamental elements of American culture. So we roll that second clip, Virginia.
Okay. They have now banned Martin Luther King Jr. They have banned Juneteenth. All right, here it is. The governor of Virginia has decided to do these things. Let's put his picture up full mass, and I'm going to give you the background as to how we got here. So you're looking at Glenn Youngkin. He's the governor of Virginia. He is promoting a racist K through 5 curriculum that leaves out Martin Luther King Jr. It leaves out slavery. So according to the governor and those that support this move, MLK is too controversial for these students to learn.
All right. So I think that's a good setup as we bring our guests into the studio with us. We're joined by Laura Fox, who's a social studies teacher at Woodson High School in the District of Columbia, who also served on a panel to advise the DC State Board of Education on updates to DC's social studies standards. Also joining us today is Patricia Mosley Hunt. She is a U.S. and Virginia government teacher of seniors at Wakefield High School in Arlington, Virginia. So we have teachers joining us today, which are some of my favorite people. You do a wonderful job each and every day, and it's a calling, and you deserve more than what you receive from this society. So you have my thanks and blessings. And so we are supposed to be joined at some point by Langston Tingling Clemens, as well as Cosby Hunt. Hopefully they will be able to make their way to the studio shortly, and we'll work them in as they arrive. And as boom, there you go, right on cue. Uh, Mr. Cosby Hunt, thank you for joining us today. Mr. Hunt is Director of Youth Programming, Center of Inspired Teaching, U.S. History teacher at DCPS. DCPS is Theodore Roosevelt High School. In 2014, while at the Center of Inspired Teaching, Hunt created the DC Social Studies course called Real World History. He has also served on the panel convened by the DC Office of the State Superintendent of Education, which is OSSE in the District of Columbia, to write and update DC social studies standards. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Cosby Hunt. So we're kind of informal here. I hope you don't mind. I use first names. You can certainly call me by mine as well. I'm just meeting Cosby and Patricia. I know Laura, and hopefully our other guest may make his way to the conversation as well. So I'm going to swing over to my associate producer, Valerie Jablo, to get us started on this. I want to, Cosby, you missed the two clips I ran. I don't know if you saw them or not, but, since this is Black History Month, wanted to talk about this issue of some governors and states trying to obliterate Black history. They don't understand that Black history is American history, and so they are trying to. I'm gonna use this quote. I was going to use it later on. There's some young people down in Florida that are actually suing Governor DeSantis, and one of the young people said he's a dumb man doubling down on a stupid decision, and I really like that. And that's what it seems. This all seems to me. So, Valerie, I'm gonna swing over to you, and we'll get this conversation going.
Well, that says it all. I think we're done our show. So thank you all for being here. The work you do is important, aside from the historical moment that we see ourselves in. But I wanted each of you to talk a bit about your experience in teaching and what this moment in time is presenting to you. And so I wanted to start with Laura Fuchs, if I could, and then go to Patricia Hunt and then Cosby Hunt. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. I'm Laura Fuchs. I teach at H.D. Woodson High School. I'm currently also teaching seniors DC history, U.S. government. But my passion for the past 16 years that I've been doing this job has been world history too. So I just really love modern world history. I love getting a chance to have the student be exposed to it. And also, kind of for me, that course in particular is possibly the last time students will formally learn about the world in an education setting, because even when they go to college, it's often not required of them to continue in a world studies path. So I just view it as one of the most important courses they can take. And it's so interesting and informative, and getting a chance to potentially re-up the standards in DC is a really great opportunity. I started when the new standards were rolled out, so I've known the entirety of these standards. And so I'm excited about the opportunity. I'm also extremely disappointed in what DC has created. So I know we'll be talking about that. So it's a great opportunity. It's also now a great concern of mine that this course in particular is being actively destroyed. So we'll talk about it.
Patricia?
So again, my name is Patricia Hunt. I am a social studies teacher at Wakefield High School in Arlington, Virginia. I teach primarily seniors, U.S. and Virginia government. This is my 30th year teaching. Before teaching in Arlington, I taught in D.C. and before that in Massachusetts. My passion is teaching government to students. And like you, Laura, I feel like it's our last opportunity to give students an opportunity to really understand their government and find a way for them to be passionate and participatory and informed and mindful of their role in our democracy. I teach government through the news and have a keen sense of the groups of people who have been left out, their stories left out of mainstream media, and have been harmed by the stories that mainstream media has shared and the way that they've portrayed various groups. So in teaching government through the news, I really hope to get students to be discerning consumers of media and be informed voters.
So, Cosby, before you jump in, I want to just say to each of you, you can leave yourselves, you can leave your mics hot unless you have a large amount of background noise. If you don't, just that way we can promote spontaneity. We don't want to have time to push a button and then start to chime in. So you can leave your mics open. Cosby?
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to see Laura and Patricia. I've known them a long time. I wouldn't expect anybody else on this panel. I'm curious what Laura's going to have to say about the standards. I know that we were tasked with something along the lines of more depth, less breadth, I believe, when we first were tasked with revising the standards. I think it would be helpful for us to look at a couple of them. I pulled a couple examples and sent them to Valerie of places where I think that's happening in the DC history curriculum. I teach U.S. history and AP U.S. history at Roosevelt High School. And as you said, Thomas, I also teach an after-school class for students from different high schools. And I feel like while DeSantis is doubling down in Florida, where I am right now on vacation, DCPS in some ways is doubling down on the opposite, perhaps. I feel like there's more emphasis on what we'll call the real history. And so I'm curious to hear what Laura has to say about her disappointment. And I really want to hear what Patricia has to say about, I mean, she's on the front lines in Virginia, Lord knows. I hope we have the chance to talk about Youngkin's tip line and the failure of that tip line.
Well,
because I think that's
this
what
conversation. This
Rashad,
conversations can certainly go there. But I know, Valerie, I know you want to say, but I wanted to. I hate to interrupt, but I wanted to kind of start at the 40,000 foot level in terms of just overall. Why are DeSantis and Youngkin and others around this country? Why are they doing this? What? I mean, is this just political pandering? Is this a sincere belief system that these folks have and their followers? Do you have any ideas? Does anybody have any idea? Patricia, do you?
I mean, my first reaction is because they can. And there are unfortunately, enough people who agree with that line of thinking, sadly. And the longer we go without teaching real history, and for so many people, the more people that will toe that line. I don't know. I don't know where. Maybe fear and misinformation. And
So that the same young man that I quoted earlier also said, so what is he going to do next? Just eliminate public education? I mean, so everybody's just as ignorant as he is.
Yeah.
I ad-libbed that back part. But Cosby, what do you think? What are your thoughts? And Laura, you feel free to jump in as well.
I think it's 75% pandering, positioning themselves for running for higher office. And the 25% is racism, white supremacy. But this is where their party is.
You think only 25% of it is racism?
Well, I mean, you can build the I suppose you can build the racism into the 75%, but I mean, it is pandering to where a certain base of the party is right now, and they know they can get some easy votes there. I think there's a whole lot of insecurity built into the fact that this is going to be a majority minority country in 20 years.
Laura, your thoughts?
Well, I was just going to add that, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, but also that it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what standards are and how they work and like how it actually like influences the classroom. And I think, and I'll be honest, like I think that's also the trap that Aussie is falling into on the other side of it. It's kind of we're turning a document political without intending to, I think, even when we're really trying to teach real history. And that's then divorcing it from the reality of what it means to actually use the document and how documents gets used by districts to then impact our classrooms. And so I think like everyone's kind of falling into this trap that one, the standards mean more than they do, and two, like that these are technical documents that should be used by experts to then influence how things are taught in the classroom. And because we're so focused on like making sure that we are doing the right things and they are the right things, when it comes to what we want our students to do, we're then seeing how the document itself actually would get translated into the classroom. And does the document, which we have all these hopes for, actually achieve what we want? Again, I think like that technical part is on both sides, unfortunately, from what I'm at least currently seeing. But I agree with everything that's being said. I think it's a political tool that's being used to kind of drive a discussion that is an important one, because what is taught is important, but then the fact that it is a tool and how it's used sometimes gets lost when we're thinking about implementation.
Can I just interject here? So our listeners may not know that DC is in the process of revising its social studies standards for the first time since 2006. So it's been 17 years. I don't know how this works in Virginia, but apparently what has happened, from what I understand in Virginia, and Patricia, you need to step in and correct me, is that the governor has proposed some changes that are completely separate from whatever educators have or state or boards of education have initiated. So the revision of the social studies standards in DC is done by way of our Office of the State Superintendent of Education, OSSE, which Laura referenced. But it has to be approved by our elected State Board of Education here in DC, which actually has very little power now that we have mayoral control of schools. But this is actually one place that our elected Board of Education does have power. And people in DC have criticized these proposed standards on a number of different levels. And as Cosby had talked about, the initial push was for more depth and less breadth, but it seems like there is a real lack of detail in the proposed standards. They've been called vague. And before our show, Cosby had emailed me a standard for DC history and government from 2006, and then the proposed replacement. And you can go into this, Cosby, please do. But I just noted that the old standard had 295 words to describe what it consists of, and the new standard has 59 words. So there's a lot that's been lost, and I just wanted to put that out there. Cosby, take it away, please.
Am I allowed to share my screen? How does that work?
No, because
that's okay. So I'll just talk about it then. So at the risk of boring people by reading something, in 2006, there were two standards in the DC history and government course around civil rights and home rule victories. And the second of those standards reads this way: Students identify key milestones and efforts that led to greater self-government and suffrage for Washington, D.C. residents. Great. And then there's sort of a subsection under there that says key milestones. And then it's a long list of very specific events and institutions, like opposition to the Southwest Civic Association and the local NAACP to urban renewal in Southwest Washington, or the proposed constitutional amendment to give Washington, D.C. congressional representation. So that's so there's a very long list, and I guess my fear is that there are teachers who are doing a lot of Googling to figure out what those things were. Likewise, in the next standard, there's a long list of people who were civic and political leaders in Washington, D.C. And to be honest with you, native Washingtonian, and of the 20 plus names, I was familiar with half of them. The new standards, proposed standards, it's right. It's very simple. Evaluate the tactics and goals of different movements for freedom, economic justice, and equality within Washington, D.C., including boycott campaigns, sit-ins, direct action, and court cases. What I like about that is that as a teacher, I can choose, okay, which boycott campaign do I want to explore with my students? Which sit-in, do I want to look at Mary Church Terrell and her work? Or do I want to look at something else? Do I want to look at Don't Mute DC? Although maybe not the time period we want. Which direct action do I want to look at? Which court cases? As opposed to the previous list that is sort of telling you these are the things that you should choose from. So I understand the criticism about vagueness. I, as a teacher, and I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say, I can take that vagueness and I can run with it.
But I was going to ask, I'm asking for those who are maybe uninformed. I'm sorry. Wouldn't you want it to be as vague as possible so that would present more opportunity for you versus?
But see, here's what I'm like, where implementation is the key. We are in DC, and DC public schools already loves to erase content. You look at the world history standards, they erase 2/3 of the ones that are listed so that they can teach primarily European studies. And that's not what the standards say. They're already pulling stunts like that right and left. DC history, I think, is a little different. It's a much narrower course. It's a narrower set of content that could be covered. So maybe it's more prone to having this kind of thing work. But standards are what students have a right to know. This isn't about teachers. This is about students. This is what students have a right to know. Now, I don't think you have to list 1,000 things and say you have to teach all of those and that that's useful. I do think listing the examples that people went through a long time of doing, and me Googling them as someone who did move in from out of the district, right? I've only been in the district for 16 years. And I did have to teach DC history year one, which was a stretch. And I probably didn't do a good job because DC was not providing many resources. And I'll be honest, if I came in now and I use the resources CPS gives me as a teacher, which is quote unquote curriculum, which is also a stretch to call it such, it wouldn't be helpful. It's not good. And it's not really usable for me and my students. And now I know better and I can do more research and I have learned more. I'm certainly no expert like Cosby Hunt, but I can do a passable job. But that's where I think implementation and the reality of our classrooms and what the standards represent is important. I think there's a way to have these general concepts, which are good, and then add the content back in. You can make it examples, you could make it non-required. But if someone's coming in cold, this document is sometimes all they have. And we have so many LEAs and districts that don't always have super supportive social studies content creators. There are going to be people coming to a charter who are untrained, who need a document that can actually help them do this job. And the way the standards are currently written, the way that for some of the courses, not all of them, I've only looked at some of them. I'm primarily focused on the world, but the way some of these are structured are white supremacist, hands down. If you did it the way they're currently structured and you didn't take the time to unpack them and repack them in a better format, you will be teaching a white supremacist framed course. It's not the intent, and I understand that. The intent is good, But that's not the reality of what is written on the page and how it will translate when in the hands of DC public schools.
So, Laura, I have to ask, if that wasn't the intent, how did we get there? How do we get so
Honestly,
Eurocentric?
For the world ones, I think it's because we didn't have people who understand world history who wrote them. Or if they did, I don't know. Because what happened was the only actual content that is listed in the world history standards for the modern course. The ninth grade one I have issues with as well, but it's different. The modern course, the only content listed is European. That's it. Everything else, they list continents. And you can't do that. You cannot do that and expect things to be taught properly in DC public schools. And the fact is, it's well intentioned. It's meant to be pointing out like the problems with what Europe and the United States did in the world in the 20th century. But if you frame the world as they're just sitting, waiting around for Europe and America to mess with them, and they don't have histories of their own that are completely separate, then you've essentially adopted a white supremacist framing. And I am an experienced world history teacher, and I would be pressed to unpack these standards and find a way to repack them where I could justify to my principal why I'm not teaching them the way that they're presented. And DCPS already falls in that trap. Why justify what they're already doing with a set of standards? So I think I'll just say one more thing. I know I got so many criticisms, unfortunately, but
hey,
when you
this is where you air those criticisms.
When you have a concept, good concepts, interesting concepts, the content is there. Just because you didn't write it down doesn't mean the content's not there. So yes, the standards have been whittled down from like very long lists of historical dates and facts and figures, many of which I personally found helpful as someone who didn't know everything about everything coming into the job. But concepts can take days, weeks to teach, right? There's a lot of concepts in some of these content areas. So like in world, again, it went down from a lot of standards to less concepts. But honestly, I'd have to be teaching 1 to 2 concepts a day, and it's not possible. And I'd be pulling content trying to get to those concepts. It's actually more. Like it's more than what it was, because when you have like World War I and they list like 1,000 things, yeah, of course I'm not covering all 1,000 things on World War I, but I can cover like 10 standards in one lesson because it's all just dates, facts, figures, basic stuff. This, you can't do that. And so it's like just the lack of understanding by whoever wrote some of these, not all the courses, but whoever wrote some of these on like the reality of the classroom and how the document will get translated through the district into curriculum, into the classroom. And it's not going to work.
I have to ask you, Patricia, because I see you nodding here, how does this work for you there in Virginia?
So I think that my experience is not really reflective of most social studies teachers, in that I teach a course that has never had a standardized test at the end of the school year. So while there are standards that are provided, we don't have the pressure to teach to a test and have to be, on point with those standards, and we have relative freedom to meet as many of those standards as we can, and maybe gloss over some of the others. So I don't teach U.S. history or world history, though government is a graduation requirement. So I'm kind of I have a fair amount of freedom. That said, the curriculum guide has not been helpful as far as effective teaching and strategies. It tends to be, it lacks sort of the fun and the engagement and the excitement that comes in the classroom when a teacher has the ability to be creative and guided by what the students are interested in and what they are excited about. That said, if you have teachers who are inclined to not teach anything close to the standards or have their own agenda, then unless you have real oversight, it can be rather messy and harmful.
Patricia, I'm going to ask you to pause right there. I'm going to ask everyone to stand by for 1 second while I remind folks, because we reached the bottom of the hour, I want folks to remember that you're tuned in to the Education Town Hall here on We Act Radio, which is located in the heart of downtown Anacostia, Southeast Washington, D.C., down the street from the Big Chair. However, we are now coming to you live and through replay on our virtual platforms, which are Anacostia adjacent. We have the honor, pleasure, and privilege of having Laura Fuchs, who is a social studies teacher at Woodson Senior High School here in the District of Columbia, Patricia Mosley Hunt, who is a U.S. and Virginia government teacher at Wakefield High School, as well as Cosby Hunt, Director of Youth Programming, Center of Inspired Teaching, among other things. And so we are certainly glad that you all are here with us today. I just want to point out, in the interest of transparency, we invited Langston Tingling Clemens, who is also a social studies teacher, to join us. I assume that circumstances prevented that from happening. So we're glad you're here with us. We will continue this conversation. I'll swing back over to Valerie so we can get into our next 27 minutes of conversation.
Thank you, Thomas. I wanted to ask you all, and I wanted to start with Cosby on this, with Thomas showing these clips of politically motivated changes in what is presented to our students, how do you, and this is kind of a sensitive question, but do you feel free as teachers? I mean, how does that affect how you do your jobs? And Patricia, when you answer this, I wanted to also ask you about, because there has been revision of standards for the classes you teach in Virginia. So I wanted to ask, all of you that, and I wanted to start with you, Cosby, because you are a creator of a DC social studies course called Real World History. And I think this is really important that students do have real world history, that it's not, going to be politically mediated. But I'm also painfully aware of the moment in time we find ourselves. So please start, Cosby.
Well, I do feel very free to create. I mean, real world history, if you think of the phrase real world, the idea is that the students spend the whole first semester studying the Great Migration, and they do oral history projects of Black Washingtonians who migrated to DC from the South before 1970. And then in the second semester, they have real world internships at museums. And so I don't feel, all of my students are Black and brown. So I don't feel I had one, oh, no, it's not true. I had one Russian kid last semester. So I think I feel a different kind of pressure than I suspect that Patricia feels. I suspect that Patricia's classroom is so much more diverse, at least from an ethnicity standpoint, than mine is. And like, no one's going to call a tip line. Yeah. As they could do in Virginia. Now, I know they've taken down the tip line, but I was just sort of so fascinated with that Orwellian thing that you guys had going on for like 6 months there. Mm-hmm. Youngkin. Like, that's not going to happen in DC. I feel like I can be as progressive as I want to be in the District of Columbia.
So, Cosby, since you brought up that tip line for the second time, I'm going to ask Patricia as she responds to what she share her views, but also explain to our listeners what that was all about. What is this tip line thing?
Yeah, so the governor opened a tip line for parents and students to call in concerns and questions about their individual teachers that are either, who are making them uncomfortable with the content or the tone of their classroom. I have to say, I have not felt that kind of pressure. I don't have colleagues that have felt that kind of pressure either. I mean, I think that there's something to be said for the sort of liberal enclave of Arlington and Northern Virginia. That said, I do have a diverse classroom. I think about 11% of students here at Wakefield identify as white. And socioeconomically, super, super diverse. But it is a bit of a liberal love fest in the classroom. And so, I have to really push the students to look at issues and events from a variety of perspectives, because it's not what we have here is not reflective of the rest of the country. But there has been, there have been a few challenges. Students not feeling super comfortable with, I don't know, like around presidential elections, particularly in 2016. But I think I've lost the question.
So let me ask you, Patricia, because you're here in Arlington, which is in Northern Virginia. How do you think your colleagues in other parts of the state that don't benefit from that liberal shield, if you will, how do you think they're doing in terms of feeling pressure or feeling that they may get snitched on if they go outside of what the governor wants?
Oh, yeah, I would imagine they feel a lot of pressure. Yeah.
I mean, Patricia, do you think, for example, the 1619 project just came out on Hulu?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's a part of me just wants to like get in there, grab an excerpt, 10 minutes, show it to class, but create I could create, we could all create a whole bunch of lessons out of that.
Yeah.
I suspect that there must be somebody, some educator in the state of Virginia who knows if this kid goes home and says, we're watching the 1619 project in my classroom, that they're hosed.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
but it's not at Wakefield, thankfully.
Not at Wakefield. Not at Wakefield. Not in Arlington, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's possible.
The 1619 is such a what's the term I'm looking for? I mean, it's become this flashpoint.
Yeah.
Those words, that number has become a flashpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. That said, it's really sad. I asked the question in all 4 of my sections of government. It was a side lesson on the Electoral College, but I asked, when were the first enslaved peoples brought to what is now the United States? And I had a lot of blank faces, and they're 12th graders, like silent.
Wow. Like didn't have an answer at all.
No, and I asked, like what century, decade? Yeah, eventually, someone said 1620. But so kids are coming not knowing their history, for sure.
Let me jump in. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I guess. And so back then there was not a focus on, I'll say, African American history or culture. And so it was mostly Eurocentric. And so then we got into the 70s and 80s and 90s, and the pendulum kind of swung where there was a significant focus on those things I just mentioned. And so now it looks like there's an effort to swing the pendulum back to more Eurocentric. Does anybody get that sense or feel that way about this sick little thing called education?
I think, like, nationally, of course, right? Like, those who are used to being in a dominant position are going to do what they can to maintain it. And it's proven, unfortunately, to be, as I think both Cosby and Patricia mentioned, an effective political tool, right? Like it's basically, it's the new dog, it's the current dog whistle. You're able to, you know, attack the standards or go after a school board. And like, you know, DeSantis isn't, what does he care about? He cares about trying to be the next Trump. And this is the current dog whistle that seems to be riling up people who do feel a lot of unfortunate, like, you know, resentment perceived, right, about their kind of economic station combined with like their concerns around race. But I did want to, I think obviously DC is different. Right? DC, the issues that we're facing with our students are very different than what Virginia and the southern states and other states that are facing kind of this discussion are facing. Because in DC, we want to be anti-racist. We want to make sure that we are promoting our students in particular and making sure their faces are the ones that they see in the classroom and in the content that they teach. And those are extremely worthy goals and ones that we hope to pursue. We want to come back, though, to this whole elimination of specific content from many of the standards could potentially damage that intent because people go to what they're used. Again, I'll stick with modern world because that is, I think, the most egregious example. But I'm worried when I looked at like the U.S. history standards that it could fall into similar traps. They're not the same. People teach what they know when given the opportunity, right? Because we have very hard jobs. Creating curriculum, like Cosby loves it, I love it, but it's hard work, right? Like, and we're both spending lots of hours creating the content we want to teach in our classroom. Not all teachers are going to be that driven to spend a lot of extra time creating content, nor should they have to. We are not curriculum specialists necessarily, right? That's not always what we're hired to be. Some people, it's just not their passion. Their passion is in the actual implementation versus the creation of content and the structuring of how you want to teach the standards and the flow and all those things. It's just, and that's fine. That's why districts hire content or specialists, right, to create some of those materials. But in DCPS, we often hire people who are very young and affiliated with the Teach for America program and not trained. That's not in every single area. Certainly some content areas have done better than others. But as someone in world who experienced it, that is what I experience in there. It's not people who understand modern world history who are creating the things that I'm expected to show to my students, right? And I think different content areas have different people, and that does affect it greatly, right? So some content areas are fantastic, and some leave a whole lot to be desired. But the thing is, you take that stuff out of the standards, they can get away with it. And that's a problem to me, right? So right now, the modern world history should be teaching about the Iranian Revolution. DCPS does not. DCPS will not teach students about the Iranian Revolution, given the chance. I had to add it, and they didn't really want me to. And then we come back to this idea of freedom. I'm very free to teach a progressive course. That's not the concern, right? I can teach just about anything. My students and their families are not going to complain if I'm, sticking with a progressive curriculum that I do believe in. What I have been doing repeatedly on deviating from what DCPS provides me and not being on their scope and sequence. And when I personally viewed their 10th grade world history course as a white supremacist scope and sequence, I refused to teach it. Now, my administrators put up with me, but I got dinged. I lost points on my evaluation. They were points I could afford to lose, and I was happy to do it. And I told the principal to do what they had to do. I was going to do what I had to do, and we'd see how it shook out. Not every teacher's that kamikaze when it comes to their career. I just couldn't do it. And I understand the teachers who are just going to teach what they're given at the pace they're given because they're told they have to. So yes, there's a lot of freedom in many ways. Some of it is school specific. Obviously, I carved out freedom for myself. I was able to do what I felt was right. My punishment was very mild to make sure everyone was checking the box they had to check. They told me what to do. I said no. They issued the consequence. We all moved. But not everyone's in this.
Laura, I have to ask, why were you so fervent in your opposition to teaching that?
Well, I just don't think a world history course should be structured around Europe when it's a world history course, not Western civilizations, right? This is a chance to learn about Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America. I'm not spending 70% of my time on Europe. I am a woman of European descent. A lot of that content is about my family. Of course, we'll teach some of it, but it's just not completely relevant to teach it in that way. I don't believe it was the intent of DCPS to create it that way. I think people stuck with what they knew. And what they knew was World War II, the start of the Cold War, like these big events that are important, but we don't have to frame the entire course around these big Western events. And we can still look at the effects of those events on other continents and areas, but we don't have to make the center. We can teach these areas in their own right. It's not, I don't have the perfect world history course. There probably is no way to do it, right? Because it's such a big content area, and how do you do that? But you don't have to frame it this way. There's ways to do that. And I think like the standards have good intent. We don't take a ton of changes, but I do think there's some fundamental changes that some of the standards need to have to get that balance between what it was, which we don't want to keep, and what we're trying to achieve. And I just don't think we have the balance yet, knowing that, like, yes, when Cosby Hunt gets these, they're going to be amazing. And he's going to dive into all this stuff with his advanced knowledge and everything he knows. DCPS is powered by a lot of very young, often new to education teachers. And we have to design something that can be used. And we also have to think about all the charter LEAs, which hire people who aren't certified, sometimes at least. And we need a document that can be used by them and not get watered down, and they could get away with it.
So I have to ask you this, Patricia, because this was fascinating to me when you mentioned about that you teach students to be discerning consumers of media. How do you do this? It is such a fraught landscape between, just mainstream media sources as well as social media, which, is full of problems. And how do you have you covered these issues of politicians trying to influence what is taught in schools? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I seek out articles that are that adhere to the standards of journalism, right? So that have well-sourced and expert analysis, and that's fair. And I often find that on NPR, and they provide timely, newsworthy stories that connect with the process or the structure lesson or concept that I'm teaching. But I also use a resource called the News Literacy Project. They've got an online platform called Checkology that teaches students. The first lesson is a lesson called Info Zones, so that students can identify the type of information that they are consuming. Often students come in and they just don't have a sense of how do you tell the difference between an op-ed and a news piece. They don't understand the difference between entertainment and advertising. And so when they understand what each piece of information is and what its purpose is, then we can take it from there. But yeah, there are lots of resources out there that help students really navigate a polluted ecosystem.
So can I ask a corollary of that initial question to all of you, which is that I'm struck by, a student being a 12th grader and not knowing a fundamental part of American history, whether it's economic or political, which is, when were the first people brought to the United States? How do you deal with, because you're all dealing with kids who come to you, they've been at their school, or they might, DC, there's a lot of student mobility between schools. How do you deal with this in terms of just sort of getting everybody up to speed? And especially because, you're teaching in some cases 12th graders. So it is indeed the last gasp, as Laura Fuchs said, for these students. I mean, how do you catch up? I guess for fundamental issues like that. Cosby, take it away, please.
Oh, I mean, that's a tough one. I think that the first thing I try to tell myself is that we can't do it all. We have to, the first unit in the present DC history, in the present U.S. history curriculum is basically a sprint from the colonial period to the Gilded Age, because we're trying to get them caught up on what they haven't had since middle school, the last time they took U.S. history. And I just tell myself, look, it's just ridiculous. Like in 3 weeks, I can't, you can't do everything that needs to be done in that sprint. I actually wish that we didn't have to do the sprint. Let's just start at the Gilded Age and just say it is what it is. Because then I end up doing like bad history because I spent 3 days on the American Revolution. So I guess my answer is kind of a cop-out, but I try to tell myself that we don't have to do it all, because there are going to be gaps that we just can't fill. I think we have to do the best with what we are tasked with doing. So in my 11th grade class, I'm tasked with Gilded Age to the present day. So that sprint through the first part, like, that's not really me. That's not really my responsibility. I just have to leave it where it is. And so if they don't know much about the American Revolution, I'm not going to be too upset because my 3 days didn't cover it, because it was kind of too tall a task to begin with. So that's my cop-out of an answer.
But I'm sure Cosby and I taught for a number of years when I taught in DC, but you teach them how to ask questions, and you teach them how to find information, and you teach them what a reliable source is, right? And so when they're curious about what came before this that has shaped where we are today, they know how to find that information. At least that's my hope. I'm confident that you do that too.
So we're getting close to the end of the show. I wanted to ask, going forward, do you think unions, as I know Laura's familiar with the DC Teachers Union, but I don't know how familiar the other two guests are, but do you think unions have a role to play with regard to getting the standards that are appropriate on a local level, and how do we push back nationally?
I mean, I definitely do. Obviously, I'm big into unions. I am the secretary of our union.
I know you are.
And I did introduce a resolution, and it passed, to have a committee of, and Cosby, please come. We haven't advertised yet, but a committee so that social studies teachers can gather. I think that part of our role in the union is to create the space and time, because I think a lot of teachers haven't had space and time to look at the standards in DC, like the new proposed ones. Maybe they have and they're happy with them, and I'm just the outlier who's running around upset. And that'd be good to know. Like, I want to know that. Like, if I'm really the outlier, then I will be quiet. I will let things roll, because I can do what I got to do if that's how I feel. But so unions can create the time and space for educators to get together, to hear from each other, to learn from each other, see like what are the different positions, and can hopefully distill that into something to speak as educators. I think we shouldn't be the only voice, of course, at the table. Many people need to be at the table, but there is a space for unions. I do think nationally, I wish the AFT at least was a little more democratic in there and was really trying to reach out to educators to solicit what we care about and think. I do think they do speak for us on this issue, but when it's just our union president, Randy Weingarten, I think sometimes that gets lost in translation because she can be easily scapegoated, which is unfair. But if we had more educators being empowered to be in the front lines of this discussion, knowing their union has their back, if there is blowback, because people who put themselves out there do experience that, of course, that could help move the conversation. And I don't know that our union has done the work to really get teachers in a space where they feel safe to fully advocate. There certainly are advocates out there who are doing amazing work, but I don't know that the unions are doing all they could to really empower those educators to feel like we've got your back. We're going to protect you when like this begins, to potentially get heated as these discussions move forward.
Patricia, you have any views on that?
Yeah, well, we don't have a teachers union in Virginia. We have teachers associations, and they're not very powerful at all. They don't play a role in the curriculum. Yeah, they're pretty feckless.
Yeah, I tried to get Mr. Fetterman to join us today, but he did not respond. So, but anyway, Cosby, I want to ask each of you. I mean, since you're all teachers, this is Black History Month. Do you have a short Black History lesson for us today? I know I'm catching you. I'm putting you on the spot. You have I'll say a Black History fact, maybe something that's obscure that maybe we don't know, maybe we already know it, but this is Black History Month, and I can't let teachers come on the show and not give me a Black History fact. Somebody give me something.
I'm getting ready to teach a lesson about Booker T. Washington's dinner at the White House in 1901, and students are sort of surprised to learn that it was the second biggest news story of the whole year behind the assassination of President McKinley. An incredibly controversial event, even though it was just dinner between a couple guys. So I enjoy that lesson because I make the students pretend to have conversations after the dinner. So they have to go back to like 1901 and then pretend that there are two people on the street talking about what they'd read in the newspaper about the dinner.
That's neat.
Let me ask a quick question. I know I should have asked this question earlier, but is there any curriculum or is any lessons around ancient African history, Kemet, and those days? And I asked because I had to give a speech at Baloo Senior High School one time for the Black History Month, and I started talking about that, and the students were totally turned off and didn't understand. I mean, because a lot of young people, they only see Black history from Martin Luther King and that perspective. They don't know ancient African history. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, in the 9th grade course, there is, I do think some of the structures there, again, maybe open a lot of doors to like, I think we're struggling with that depth versus breadth balance. It is a struggle. It's a struggle as a teacher, especially I think with world, but even when teaching US or DC history, it's a struggle. So it is there. If you check out the 9th grade world history standards, the different cultures are there. But I do think because there's so much opportunity for choice in what you do, and there's so little time, that I think, again, people will tend to choose what they feel comfortable with already rather than developing a lot of work into learning what they don't know. And that's a challenge now as well. So, it's not like a new challenge, but it is there.
Well, that's going to probably have to be the last word. We're at 12:59, and this hour went by so incredibly fast. And I'm so ecstatic that I had 3 teachers. I created the Education Town Hall for parents, students, and teachers to have access to the public square. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for participating in this discussion today, given that it is Black History Month. And so I'm just so tickled that I have teachers on with me today. And Cosby, I appreciate that Black History fact because I didn't know that. So I learned something today. So you did a good job. You all did a great job. I want to thank Laura Fuchs, who's a social studies teacher at Woodson High School here in the district. Patricia Mosley Hunt, who's a U.S. and Virginia government teacher. at Wakefield High School in Arlington, Virginia, and Cosby Hunt, Director of Youth Programming and Center for Inspired Teaching here in the district, who's now on vacation down in Florida. Thank you all for joining us. I want to thank all who have tuned in live and all those who will listen to the replay of the show. We thank you so much because we know you had options. We're glad you tuned in. I want to thank my technical director, Virginia Spatz, my associate producer, Valerie Diablo. Until we meet again, folks, take care and love somebody. It's your humble servant and host, Thomas Bird. Peace.